Hoopheads podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. Today we are going to be discussing the topic, don't coach from the stands. And Jason, this is one of the things that I know we've talked about it a little bit in other podcasts about just parents and some of the crazy behavior that we see on the sidelines of games, at travel games, rec games, AAU games, pickup games. It really doesn't matter. If there are parents on the sideline watching their kids play, far too often we see behavior that is just not conducive to helping their kids. And I think that's one of the things that parents forget is when they're instructing, when they're yelling, when they're cheering, when they're doing the things that they're doing, in many cases that can be very distracting for a young player. And so we're going to give you some reasons today why we feel it's very, very important for you not to coach from the stands, and then we'll wrap up the episode by giving you some do's and don'ts for what you should do when you're on the sideline watching your kid play. It could be basketball or it could be any other sport for that matter. Our first reason why we feel you should remain quiet when you're in the bleachers and not coach from the stands is because many times the advice that you as a parent are giving to your kid is often in direct contrast with what the coach's directions might be. So just as an example, you might be yelling for your young player to get up and guard their opponent closely, where your coach may have said, hey, we want you to back off 2 or 3 steps so that you don't get beat to the basket. And when the kid hears the coach saying one thing and the parent saying another thing, a lot of times it's very difficult for them to figure out, well, who am I supposed to listen to? And they're not sure. And I think, Jason, that can be very distracting for kids.
For sure. I can think of a specific example where I was coaching my team, and we were down like 2 or 3 points with about a minute left. And I had told the kids I wanted them to trap. And one of the parents from the stands is yelling, you need to foul, you need to foul. And what did the kids do? They listened to the parents and they fouled. Right after we had a successful trap, we probably would have gotten a turnover. Obviously, we don't know what would have happened, but we could have had a turnover. And, and we ended up losing the game by 5 or 6, so I don't ultimately know that it mattered. But at the same time, the kids just listen to their parents because it's their instinct, because it's who they've been listening to for 13 years, whereas they've been listening to me for 2 months.
Yeah, it's very much a difficult situation and a stressful situation for kids when 2 adults that they respect are telling them 2 different things, and they know they're going to have to get in the car after the game with their mom or dad. They know they're going to have to go to the next practice with their coach, and so they hear these 2 different messages, and that's stressful for anybody. I mean, imagine you're at work and your boss is telling you one thing and your coworker is telling you something else, and you're trying to decide what to do and you don't know it. That's a stressful situation. And again, we're talking about that from an adult perspective. So imagine if you're a 9 or 10-year-old kid getting those 2 different messages. Man, that's a really, really difficult situation. I actually have a really good example from another sport. This one's from soccer, and I'm going to share it because it was pretty recently. This past spring season, I was at a soccer game, and there was a parent that was on the sideline who was yelling at his daughter, and the daughter was playing defense. I don't claim to know a whole lot about soccer, but the defenders were set up in a certain position where it was obvious that the coach wanted them lined up on the goalie box, and that's where he wanted them, and they were there when the ball was at the other side of the field, and it was clear that the coach had instructed them to be there. And there was a parent on the sideline yelling to his child, and I'll just call her Maria. Maria, move up, move up, move up. And he kept yelling at her, and Maria, you could tell, clearly had been told by her coach not to move up. So Maria was listening to her dad and staring over at him, but wouldn't really move. And the father just kept yelling and yelling more and getting louder and yelling her name. And eventually he said, Maria, move up 10 steps right now. And you could see the girl you could just read her face and her body language of, she didn't know what to do. And she actually moved her feet like she was walking 10 steps but didn't go anywhere. It was like she was walking in place, and which was a good move by her.
That's impressive for a 9 or a 10-year-old to do that.
It really was. And at this point, the father just kept yelling, and finally he yelled the classic line, "I don't care what he says, you move up right now." And again, you're at a little kid's soccer game, so everybody's hearing this, including the coach on the opposite side of the field. So as soon as that happened, the coach, I think, mercifully removed the girl from the game, not because he was upset with her, but just because he was able to read the situation. And when he took the girl out of the game, the father then turned and walked away and went to the parking lot and got in his car. So I assume that his wife was still at the game. But again, like, what a terrible situation to put your 9-year-old daughter in, that you're yelling and creating this type of stress for them. It's just a terrible thing to do to a kid. And again, parents are a lot of times well-intentioned, but if they really think that they're improving their kid's ability to play the game by yelling those instructions, I can tell you, parents, you're not. You're making it much more difficult for that kid to concentrate and play the way they're supposed to. It's hard enough to listen to a coach, let alone try to listen to two people and know what to do and be able to make good decisions and play. And so all I can say to you, parents, is don't share coaching advice from the stands.
All right. Well, that kind of leads us into the second thing about kids getting coached in the stands, and the reason it's detrimental at times is because reason two would be that they are constantly seeking approval from their parent. And poor Maria, in your example, she was definitely probably trying to seek approval when she started to take those 10 steps. And I think a lot of times these kids, they go up and they're listening to their coach, but they always seem to glance up to the stands because they want to impress their parents, because their parents are their parents. And then, I can think of times when kids would go to the foul line and they missed the first free throw. I had a kid that would immediately look into the stands to their parent, and their parent would mouth words to them or tell them to calm down. I think sometimes the parents can be good in that instance, they're trying to calm down, telling them to relax. But most of the time, they're looking for their parents and they're getting all nervous, and it just stresses them out, and they don't know what to do because they want to impress their parents. They want to show what they've been doing in practice. I can think of examples where we're doing things in practice, and then they look up to their parents, and their parents are telling them once again to do something completely opposite of what we've been working on. So I think, these two kind of go together, but at the same time, we just have to kind of keep in mind that kids want to appease whoever their role models are, and whether that's the coach or their parents, and probably want to appease their parents more than anything because they live with them and they definitely spend more time with them. So I think it's really important to realize that kids are just kids, and sometimes they get pulled in two directions and they don't know how to handle it.
Yeah, and they're distracted too. I think of just the number of times where I've been coaching, and again, at all different, I'm talking from high school coaching all the way down to coaching kindergartners, and no matter what level I've coached at, inevitably I've had one or two kids on every team that I've coached that whenever anything happens, those same kids look at the stands every time. They make a shot, they throw a bad pass, they miss a free throw, they make a three-pointer, they catch the ball in the case of a kindergartner, and they look immediately to their parents. And again, it's totally distracting because, like we always say in coaching, the next play is the most important one. And so if after play number one, you're looking up into the stands, even if it's just for 2 seconds, in that time, the other team could be inbounding the ball and going down, and you've missed an assignment, or you drop the ball out of bounds, and now all of a sudden you're standing, you take that time to look up into the stands to see what your dad thinks, and all of a sudden the ball is zipping by you. And it's a tremendous distraction. What I always find interesting is that it's either a kid who does it almost every single time something happens, and then there are other kids who never even look at their parents. And I just find it interesting that you rarely find somebody in the middle who occasionally looks. It's either the kid who looks every single time or the kid who never looks. And I don't know about you, but when people always would ask me when I was playing, what about, is it more fun to play in front of a big crowd? Is it intimidating to, be on the road and people are yelling stuff at you? And, do you hear things people are saying? Do you notice people in the stands? And I would always say, I don't notice anything. I don't really hear anything. I mean, obviously, it's loud. There are people cheering or, rooting against you or whatever the case may be. But I can honestly say, in my entire career, I don't remember ever hearing anything specific, and I also don't remember ever looking to my parents in the stands during a game to see what they thought, or to see what was on their mind. And again, my dad spent a lot of time when I was younger coaching me, so it's not like he was somebody who wasn't involved in my career or didn't know basketball or whatever the case might have been. He was very involved, and yet at the same time, I never felt the need to look up into the stands for his approval, because again, I was focused on the game. And I think parents sometimes forget that when they're looking at them, when your kid is looking at you, you're distracting them from what they're supposed to be doing, which is paying attention to the game and having fun and experiencing the game for themselves, and not experience it for their parent.
Well, I obviously didn't have as prolific of a career in basketball as you did, but I always remember getting very distracted. Maybe that's part of the reason I didn't have any chance, because
there we go. We solved your problem. We figured it out.
Other than that, and the sometimes my work ethic when I was a kid wasn't necessarily the strongest. However, I will say, and it might also be partial ADD. I get distracted very easily, and I know my dad stopped coming to I was playing rec league. And he stopped coming to my games because he said that I got too distracted with him sitting in the stands, and that's probably very true. But he was a different kind of parent where he realized that was going on, so
right.
he took himself out of the situation instead of inserting himself into the situation. So I think.
Have you had any kids since you've been? I don't mean to interrupt you, but have you had any kids since you started coaching? Your middle school teams. Have you had kids that clearly played better when mom or dad wasn't at the games?
I can think of one specific player that did, but that was more because and this was a girl, and I'm not gonna. That's as far as I'm gonna go with identifying her. But she clearly got annoyed at her father because her father would say things to her before the game, like do this during the game or do that during the game.
Right.
So if dad wasn't there, I definitely could see that she would play better. Mom didn't really affect the situation at all because mom was a silent observer more than anything. So I definitely noticed the one girl would play better when her dad wasn't there. But at the same time, I mean, she was a solid player as it was, either way, but she definitely had better games when dad wasn't there, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed in over time, this is how I guess I look at this particular issue, is I've had plenty of players who have played better in the absence of their parents. I've had lots of players who the presence of their parents has been neutral. And I honestly can't think of one situation where there was a kid who played better when their parents were there than when they weren't there. So I guess the point is that the parental influence from the stands, the best you can get is to be neutral, and you're more likely to be a negative in terms of, again, if you're coaching. Obviously, your kid appreciates you being there and being at the games, and I know I appreciated my parents being there, and any kid that I've ever coached, unless it's, again, a situation where you have somebody that's making the kid stressed out during the game, kids appreciate and want their parents there watching them, as you've said numerous times, that they want their parents' approval, and rightfully so. We just have to, as parents, be careful that we're there in a supporting role. We're there in a role where we love our kids no matter what their performance is out on the court, and that we're not putting undue pressure on them and creating stress so that they play worse when we're at the games. And I think that's the danger that we have to watch out for. Let's move on to number 3. And the third reason why we feel it's very, very important for you not to coach from the stands is when you are trying to dictate every single move that your kid makes. Shoot it, pass it, dribble it, go there, guard this. What you're really doing is you're taking away your kid's ability to learn how to make decisions for themselves. And eventually, again, especially if you're doing this with a very young player, eventually they're going to get to a level of basketball where the game moves too fast for you to be able to tell them what to do and when to do it and how to do it. and you're really cheating them out of the ability to make decisions. And I think coaches sometimes do that same thing. Like, they try to choreograph and orchestrate so much from the bench, and they forget that, you want to do your coaching during practice, and then during the games, there's not a whole lot of control that you have. You want to give your players the freedom to be able to make decisions, especially at the youth level, because that's how kids really learn. That's really how kids learn how to play the game.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes along with just life in general, especially nowadays. I feel like a lot of times parents are coddling their kids and trying to help them do everything the right way, quote unquote, and it translates onto the basketball floor, where these kids think that their parents, anything they say is gold, and they have to do it that way. And then the kids, when they get into a situation where maybe their parent isn't at a basketball game, okay, but the other 10 games their parent has been there shouting things at them from the stands, they don't know what to do with the ball. And they get into situations where they're struggling, and they don't know what to do, and they break down. And I can think of one specific student that I had 2 years ago, that their mom and dad would yell from the stands all the time, and whatever their mom or dad did. And by the way, this person also would try to tell me how I could go about correcting my team's mistakes, or what I should do to make my team better. And I kind of
those parents are always fun to deal with. Yeah.
I just smiled and nodded and just kind of, I think once again, I think their intentions were good. Their method necessarily wasn't the best. And I want to put this out there, that this father knew that his daughter wasn't one of the best, 4 or 5 on the team. So he understood.
Right.
And he had a coaching experience and stuff. So I think he had good intentions. I don't necessarily know that his methods were the best. But at the same time, the kids get stuck in their ways, and if they're so used to their parents making the decisions for them, they don't know what to do. And like you said, when they face a situation that they don't know, that it's too quick for their parent to yell, they kind of just shut down. They'll turn the ball over real quick, or they'll dribble the ball off their foot, or do something that they shouldn't have done, because they're so used to their parents telling them what to do. So I think it's really, really important to encourage the players to learn how to make decisions. And if that means that they have to make lots of mistakes along the way, you got to live with it. That's part of the growing process. It's part of the learning process.
For sure. I'm going to jump in on 2 points that you made. And the first one is that basketball is such a fast-paced, decision-making game that there's no way that a parent or a coach can process what's going on, relay that information to the player, and have the player have any hope of executing that in real time. And really, the best players at any level, whether you're talking about the best 8-year-old, or you're talking about the best high school varsity player, or you're talking about the best NBA players, you're talking about players that can make decisions in the moment that are the right decisions. They react to the situations around them, they've practiced them, they've seen them, they know what's coming, and then as a result, they're able to make good decisions and execute whatever it is. So we want to be able to teach kids to make great decisions out on the court from as early an age as possible. And like you said, making mistakes is a huge part of that. Having a growth mindset where kids are accepting of a challenge, where things don't always come easy, where they fail. And a lot of times in our world today, parents, we try to protect our kids from that type of failure, when really we need to be encouraging them to fail more, because that's when they're really stretching themselves, and that's where growth occurs. And then the second point that I want to bring out that you mentioned, which I thought was an excellent one, is that the majority of us parents are well-intentioned, and it's certainly not our goal to go out and help our child perform worse. The majority of parents who you see and hear doing some of the things that we're describing feel that what they're doing is beneficial, and they really think that they're helping their kid or helping their team. But the reality is that those behaviors don't help. So as well-intentioned as a parent might be, it's important to remember that a lot of the things that we've talked about so far are things that just really don't help your kid perform better. And so even though parents are well-intentioned, we're just trying to be a voice of reason here to educate them that, hey, be a positive force on the sideline. You can cheer, but coaching from the stands doesn't help your kid play better, and in many cases it makes them play worse.
Those were both great points. All right, so we've talked about the three things why we don't think that you should really coach in the stands or why it could be detrimental. But let's talk about what you can do, and here are some tips for what to do and what not to do while you're watching your child play basketball. The first, cheer and be supportive of your player and their team. And that also goes along with don't be rooting against the other team. Root for your child's team. Don't criticize other parents, coaches, players, or referees. If you don't have anything nice to say, keep your mouth closed on the sidelines. Don't shout instructions at the players. Let the coaches handle it. It just confuses the kids. We've kind of talked about that point. And then don't yell at the referees. It upsets the players and encourages them to do the same. And I just want to address one thing when it comes to don't yelling at the referees. If you have a problem with yelling at the referees, you begin to have a reputation around the specific communities of not being a referee-friendly location. I will recuse myself from saying what specific team has a bad reputation in the SWC conference for basketball, but every single place that I go, the site or the AD or whatever will always point out, has this team played with you yet? Because the parents, I had to go sit in the stands and make sure the parents didn't yell and get ridiculous. And I think it's really important that we don't have that situation, because you will be known and then the referees won't give you any favorable calls. If you don't think you were getting favorable calls, then berate the officials and see what happens. So that's the only point I wanted to make with that.
No, I agree. And I think that the bigger point that goes along with that is a lot of times it only takes one parent or one coach to set the tone in either a positive or a negative way when it comes to dealing with officials. If you have one parent who's vocal and loud and obnoxious and yelling at officials, other parents kind of look around and see that and think, hey, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what we should be doing. And then before you know it, you have a situation like you described. And in the same way, I think if you have coaches that spend their time yelling at the officials instead of coaching their kids, I think that a lot of times can carry over into the stands, and parents can pick up on the fact that, hey, the coach is doing it, so it must be something that I should be doing. And sometimes it just becomes contagious. So as you said, don't yell at the referees. I guarantee your player doesn't like it when you're screaming at the official. They don't feel like you're supporting them. They're more embarrassed. And if they could tell you what they thought, I'm sure they would say, Mom, Dad, please stop that. You're embarrassing me. So keep in mind, again, you're there to support your child and to be a parent. You're not there to be a coach. You're not there to be a referee. You're there to be a parent. So just be there to support your child. And that leads to our final point, and that is, just remember that when you're there watching the game, it's a journey, and it's your child's journey, and try to enjoy it. At some point, they're going to be done with their athletic career, and you're going to really miss having the opportunity to watch them play. So when you're watching them play, enjoy it. Try to do all the things that we talked about here on the podcast. And then when it's over, whether it's practice or a game, always try to ask them 3 questions. The 3 questions that I always ask my kids when they come off the floor, and I've heard this said from numerous different sources. I don't know where it came from first, but I know ever since I first heard it, I've been doing it. So those 3 questions are, 1, did you have fun? 2, did you play hard? 3, did you listen to your coach? And then I get their answers. And then finally, when that's all done, I just say, I love watching you play. And it's non-judgmental. I'm not talking about how good or bad you played. I'm not ready to dissect the entire game. They just know that I was there supporting them. And I think it's been something that has made it much more fun and pleasant for me. And I also think it's made it much more fun and pleasant for my kids. And I've heard stories of people who have read the blog post that I wrote about this topic, And I talked a little bit about it in a video I did for the Positive Coaching Alliance. And I've had people come up to me and say, hey, I use those questions. I've told my kid I love watching you play, and it's just made such a difference in my sporting parent life. And that's really what it's all about for me, Jason. So I don't know if you have anything to add on that, or if you've thought about that.
I always make sure, like you said, I loved watching you play to your kids. When I talk to my kids after I coach them, I say, hey, I liked what you guys showed. I make sure that I give them a positive. Next day's practice can be my let's talk about what we did wrong. But I try to always be very positive with them, especially after game. Even if we got, we didn't play a very good game, I try to be positive because I don't want them to have a negative attitude leaving the floor.
Absolutely. And when you say I love watching you play as a parent, there's nothing that makes that kid feel better than knowing that you were there as a parent to support them. So Jason, to all our listeners out there, thanks for listening to this episode of the Hoopheads podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks.
Head Start Basketball is excited to announce their new Player Development Academy classes. This offers Cleveland area players a unique opportunity to improve their basketball skills. Regardless of a player's age, skill level, or position, training with Head Start Basketball will elevate their game to the next level. All player development classes will be held at the Strongsville Recreation Center on Monday evenings. During your child's first class, we will evaluate his or her ball handling, shooting, and agility. We will discuss your availability and schedule to ensure we have them in the right class for their development. Players will be evaluated frequently to ensure they are training in the proper class for their current skill level. For more information about this class, please visit headstartbasketball.com.
Thanks for listening to the Hoopheads podcast, brought to you by Head Start Basketball.